August 14th, 1989 marked the 20th anniversary of the Woodstock Festival. The Morning Exchange celebrated this anniversary with an incredible program. It was live outside Edgewater Park. People were encouraged to attend, and it was basically like a mini recreation of Woodstock in some ways. You had Alex Bevan and Oroboros providing music, two Cleveland bands steeped in the traditions of the Woodstock era music and ethos, I guess you should say. Read those books behind you. Anyhow, besides the bands, you had people that wrote books. You had Hog Farm veteran Lisa Law talking about her book, Flashing on the 60s, and she recounts firsthand experience being at the festival and working with Wavy Gravy and the other people of the hog farm, providing the services for the crowds, the social structure for the festival. Ironic that the hippies provided structure. You also had Joel Makower promoting his book, Woodstock An Oral History. And you had one of the actual event organizers, Stanley Goldstein, and he discusses the steps that led up in the planning stages of the festival. And as we saw famously in the movie and have heard, that was not an easy task. I mean, the population exploded many times over what was planned for and created the rain-filled, mud-filled, LSD-crazed music fest we know as Woodstock. So from 32 years ago, let's look back at the 20th anniversary of Woodstock on the Morning Exchange.
And hippies.
Well, I came upon a child, a guy, he was walking along the road. I asked him, where are you going? This he told me. Said, I'm going down to Yasgur's farm. I'm gonna join in a rock and roll band. I'm gonna camp out on the land and try and get my soul free. We are stardust, we are golden, we are caught in the devil's bargain, and we've got to get ourselves back to the garden.
Alex Bevan. Alex, thanks so much for that, for coming out to be with us this morning. Alex will be on a panel a little later on to talk about Woodstock here this morning. But right now we're going to... a little bit on that wide shot like Max Yasgur's farm, doesn't it?
A little bit, a little piece of it.
Yeah, a little piece of it. Two men are...
We've been entertained this morning by Oroboros. Did I say that right?
Yes, you did.
All right. Jim Miller is the guitarist, singer, and writer for the group. How long have you been together?
9 years.
And would you quickly introduce people starting down on the left there at keyboards?
Mr. Mike Bradley on keyboards and songwriter and singer. Mr. Bill Cully on percussions.
Yeah.
Mr. Don Safranik, who is usually our percussion player, but he's our drummer today because our friend Rob Luomo, who's our usual drummer, is in France. Okay. And here is Mr. Dave Downing on bass.
All right. Now, we've been hearing music from the 60s here this morning. Is that a big part of the repertoire you perform?
We play things that we grew up with, yeah, but mostly what we do is originals. We try to center on that, although we're real well known for the Grateful Dead and doing things like Little Feat and, you know, the Beatles and that sort of thing. We do lots of stuff. We're very eclectic.
Well, you brought lots of your fans with you here this morning, and they're familiar with your songs. If other people would like to come see you perform, where can they do that?
We'll be playing this Friday at the Euclid Tavern, and then we're going to be doing an all-ages show Saturday, the 19th, at the Fantasy Theater on the west side.
All right, this is Oroboros, and Jim, I'm going to step out of the way here so you guys can play.
Okay.
Thanks.
There's a song called Living on Our TV. I think it's appropriate for today.
Came home late again last night. The stars are looking good to me. Settled way back in my easy chair, and I turned on my TV. Out on Gilligan's Island, Ricky Ricardo was a serving me tea. The theme from Leave It to Beaver was an orchestral hymn of me. On the Starship Enterprise, and the fighter began to fly. Playing all the chords on MTV, and no, I didn't even try. The room was spinning right to me. I was at the Secretariat, focusing his dissertation on Barney Fife's old toupee. I spent the night and white, the wheels waltzing by. In a teeny, no, I can't even fly.
Time for us to take another look at this morning's news. Jenny has prepared it for us. Good morning, Jenny.
Songs Ohio, times I think it's crazy. That's the time I think it's
Good morning. Welcome to the second hour of the Morning Exchange on this Monday, August 14th. And our Woodstock salute continues thanks to Oroboros for providing the tunes this morning.
Good band.
Mighty, mighty good. Well, in the second hour of our program, we're going to continue.
And we're also going to talk with Joel Makower, who has written Woodstock, the Oral History. And it's a compilation of words from a lot of people who were involved in the concert, in producing the concert, and who were there.
And we're going to have a panel a little later on about what it all meant. We'll have a psychologist here this morning, and we're going to have Alex Bevan, who is a student of these matters.
What did it mean?
What did it all mean? And we're going to be... Joel, it's nice to see you again. Thank you very much for being here today.
Good to be here.
And Joel's book is called Woodstock, the Oral History. He was not there, but he talked to just about everybody who was. And it's good to see you again. Thanks very much for being here today. He also, I said earlier, you had a video, but you have an audio cassette, 2 audio cassettes that encapsulate much of what you learned when you talked to all the principals and all of the people who went to Woodstock. So it's nice to have you here this morning. Lisa Law is here this morning. She of the Keen Eye. She was there as well and was working at Woodstock, and she has done a book called Flashing on the 60s, which I'll show you here just where. There it is. And it's good to have you here. Thank you very much, Lisa, for being here this morning.
Thank you.
And Lisa, in fact, is making a video about which more later. And Stanley Goldstein, I think you were working down in Florida, were you not? And came up from Florida to work with these guys on putting this thing together?
Close. I was passing through New York, and a call was made to Florida to track me down, and one thing led to another.
And you ended up as a kind of a jack of all trades. You put about 5 million details together.
Yeah.
Only to see it all sort of come apart when
Well, I don't
so
think
many
it
people
came apart.
Well, so many people came, far more than you ever dreamed.
Yes. Yes, indeed.
When you guys were planning this thing, how many folks did you think might come?
Well, we kept revising our estimates as time went by. When we lost the first site, and there was tremendous media attention given to the show, and ticket sales began to zoom, our estimates for on-site went up to 250,000 people. Of course, more people than that apparently came.
Mm-hmm. Can you give us a little background on how the show actually was put together and how the bands were hired?
Well, I can't tell you too much about the hiring of the bands because I was not involved in that process. Primarily, there was early on an attitude that we were going to do thematically a gentle night on Friday night, an English or a harder rock night, and a San Francisco or a psychedelic U.S.-based night. Michael Lang had the primary driving impulse for the entire festival, as well as the booking of the show, and then he worked with Hector Morales at William Morris Agency, and with John Morris, who acted as our internal coordinator of those activities, and traveled around a lot, listened to a lot of bands, picked and chose, had a number of bands that fortunately were more or less shoved down our throats, that if you wanted to get this band, you had to take that band. We had to take Santana, which was one of the nicest things that could have possibly happened to us. And so it was carefully selected. There were a lot of folks who wanted to play who just didn't seem to fit the attitude and the idea that we wanted to present. But as I say, I was primarily not involved in those activities. Michael Lang did that very much directly.
Stan's the one who came and got us at the hog farm.
Yes, and you came with Wavy Gravy and that whole band of people who were responsible for, I suppose, being the social glue that held the thing together, kept it from disintegrating.
Yeah, if it hadn't been for Stan, we wouldn't have been there. He came out to New Mexico, and we were having a summer solstice celebration at Aspen Meadows in Santa Fe, and there were thousands of us. I got married that day. Yogi Bhajan married us in an Indian ceremony. And then we had the great bus race with Ken Kesey and the hog farm buses, and Stan was watching this whole thing, and he knew about us before. And he invited us to come out, and we weren't sure whether he was real or not until he sent us a jumbo jet from American Airlines to come get us, and we all boarded the plane and went out there.
How many were you who came east for that big event?
I think there were 80 of us that came, plus 15 Indians, and we brought teepees and teepee poles, and a couple of our buses came out first.
Yeah, there were 88 on the plane, and some 12 or 15 folks had driven across country on a bus and arrived some weeks before the show to do the prep
and
for
a lot
the
of
main
kids.
group. And a lot of kids.
A lot of kids.
Incredible number of kids.
What was the function of this plane load of people at the festival?
Well, we set up the free stage, the free kitchen. We helped with medical tents. We took care of the people that were on LSD.
Massive
drug
undertaking.
Abusers or users or whatever. And we fed a lot of people off the stage muesli that we had next to the stage, because a lot of people didn't want to get up and move from the stage over to where we were feeding people on the other side of the forest. So we brought the food to the stage and fed them, and then we had these 5 booths where we served food that we were cooking day and night. In fact, I went to New York and bought $6,000 worth of supplies. That the festival gave me $6,000, and I went and bought all these supplies, and we set up these booths and these kitchens and fed people around the clock, and the volunteers are the ones that ended up cooking.
And we see some of the video that you yourself made at that time.
Yes, I did a Super 8 documentary of, which is now being used by a lot of people to show what had happened. These are the police that were off-duty police that came there. And here are the kids first arriving. It was amazing because we didn't actually know how many were going to come, but I figured there were going to be a lot, and that's why we bought so much food. But when that many showed up, it was astounding to us. It was very, very exciting to see that many people in one place.
It was a great event, and everybody looks happy. And we need to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to ask Joel how it was that he, who did not go there, finally was drawn to interview virtually every principal in this extraordinary adventure. And we'll be back with him right after this. Playing for us here this morning as we look back at Woodstock, which started 20 years ago tomorrow. And Joel, how old were you at the time of Woodstock, if I might ask?
You may. In 1969, I was 17 years old. I was playing in a third-rate rock and roll band in my native Oakland, California.
And did you have a tendency to want to go there when you started to hear the build-up and the hype about what was going to happen in upper New York State?
I certainly knew about it, and the word was on the street. The word on the street, and actually by the time I got to San Francisco, was that there was this great party going to be given on Dillon's Farm in upstate New York. I mean, this was, this is the way the word was going. Nobody really knew exactly what was happening, and in fact, I interviewed a woman who lived in the Haight-Ashbury and heard exactly that, and based on solely on that piece of information was inspired to stick her thumb out on Interstate 80 and hitchhike to the other end of the continent.
You talked to so many people to put together your oral history book. You learned a lot, I'm sure, about the festival. Were there any things that particularly stuck out or really surprised you?
Oh, I don't know where to begin. There's some wonderful stories. Stan Goldstein has this great tale to tell about how he was trying to figure out how many portable toilets there were needed, and he would go, in order to do that, because no one had ever done anything of this size, went to Madison Square Garden and LaGuardia Airport and I think Shea Stadium or Penn Station, and was with a clipboard and a stopwatch and was counting people going in and out and multiplying and dividing, adding and subtracting, and came up with, of course, outlandish numbers of things. And there's great stories about how the bands wouldn't play on Saturday night, late Saturday night,
Why is that?
Because that turned into a free festival, and everybody knew that the promoters were losing their proverbial shirts and might not have, in fact, the money to pay the bands. And so the managers for the Grateful Dead and the Who insisted on $25,000 in cash up front, which late Saturday night was a little bit difficult to come by. There's a great tale how the promoters were able to call their banker, rouse him out of bed late at night, and have him go out in his pajamas and bathrobe on the front lawn of his house, pick him up by helicopter, and ferry him over to the bank. I mean, and get them. It's great. There's lots of stories. It was so much fun. The idea that I had when I set out to do this, the idea I had when I set out to do this was to tell the story, because it had never really been told, or at least told well. And I had this image in the back of my head was, what if you could get producers, performers, doctors, cops, neighbors, shopkeepers, Mrs. Max Yasgur, the widow of the landowner, Wavy Gravy from the Hog Farm, Lisa and Stan and Abby Hoffman, and some kids out on the field, and put them into sort of one metaphysical cosmic living room and have them go around and tell the story. What would it sound like? I didn't get them all in the living room. I interviewed them all face to face, but that was what I did.
That's how it seems in the book.
It was fun to do, and I met some wonderful people.
And you did a little tape recording of every conversation you had, and you've crafted that into a little audio package that's also available. How many hours of interviews do you think you did in pulling together this rather substantial book?
It's somewhere 100, 120 hours. I started off with about 2,000 pages of transcripts of all these conversations.
Did you very carefully think through what you wanted to ask each person that you approached?
Well, I had, when you're a journalist, as you well know, what you come up with is 2/3 of what you're looking for and 1/3 of what you find along the way. So yeah, I had, with certain people, I had researched and read just about everything about Woodstock, and I knew the story of some people, but there were other people who just, I didn't know what we were going to find out, and we found out some fun stuff.
In talking to people who were there, do people look upon Woodstock as though it were a kind of turning point in our society?
I think for individuals, I'm not one of those people who believes that Woodstock changed a lot of things, with the possible exception of the music industry, upon which it had a profound effect. I think it was a personal experience. A lot of people went to Woodstock and looked around and basically said, wow, there's this many of us?
We're not so underground anymore.
And took that, and because they might have only known their community or their high school or their college or even their little part of New York City, if that's where they hailed from, and took that energy, took the self-affirming, self-validating experience that they got there and back home, and I think used that energy in some ways. But I'm sure if it really had any long-lasting effect any more than a lot of other events did.
You talk about how it affected the music industry. What do you mean?
Well, first of all, let me say that one of the astounding things I found in talking to all these myriad souls was that virtually nobody remembers the music. I mean, I talked to people who spent 3 days sitting in the mud in an alfalfa field in the moral equivalent of row M, seat 114, you know, like primo, you know, right there, front and center. And you ask them, what do you remember about the music? And they'd say, well, I remember Richie Havens. Well, Richie opened the show, and if you were there on Friday, everyone remembers Richie Havens. But beyond that, their memory gets out there a little foggy, and maybe for good reason. So it wasn't a great musical event, but the music industry, and in fact the corporate America in general, looked at Woodstock and the people there and this great power of the people, and did a lot of things with it. It's been said that we went to Woodstock as 500,000 individuals, but we left as a market.
Stan, you were involved almost from the beginning, and he spoke of getting some good stories from you, and I wonder how it is. He's wearing a Hog Farm t-shirt. How was it that the Hog Farm was in your mind, and how was it that you decided to send for Lisa and her pals? How did that come about?
Well, when we first began putting the show together, we knew that we were going to be doing something unique and unusual, that we were trying to move people from the normal environment. We wanted to do something other than a stadium, other than a concert hall. And we felt that it was very, very important that if we were inviting people into a strange environment, that somehow we demonstrate to them our concern, show people how to survive in that environment. While there was a great movement, a great yearning to go back to the land, a lot of folks were reading Mother Earth News and other things and the Whole Earth Catalog and dreaming about going back to the land, but they'd never spent a night out under the stars in their lives. So it was very important to us to have an exemplar there. We also knew that there would be the kinds of problems that the normal medical community and the normal security community simply was unprepared to deal with, and that it was necessary to have that, and that there was no way that we few staff members, promoters who had an idea and an attitude about the way we wanted to relate to the crowd could possibly do that. And so it was important for us to have an interface, a communications interface to the members of the audience, to the members of the radical community, to all of the folks that we couldn't speak to individually and directly. And it seemed very important that we be able to deal with a cohesive group, a group that had its own unique identity and had an integrity, which the Hog Farm had. I searched out and looked at and spoke to a lot of communal groups. The Hog Farm was very early on the prime focus. They spoke primarily with Gravy and Johanna and others, but they had a unique idea about how to relate to a crowd and what was important to do, such as free kitchens. They understood the concept.
Plus they spent a lot of time traveling around the country just doing good deeds for the world and cleaning up trash and throwing parties and getting everyone to interact with each other, and so it was the perfect thing.
When we come back, Lisa, I'm going to open the pages of your book, if I might, and we'll see some of the pictures you made in the 1960s. Wonderful things, and we'll continue our discussion of Woodstock and Woodstock as it was then and 20 years after, right after this.
TV5's
Live from Edgewater Park. Oroboros, great band playing for us this morning. Joel Makower is here this morning, who wrote an oral history of Woodstock. Lisa Law is here this morning, and Stanley Goldstein, who was one of the producers of the great event. And Lisa, we were talking about your book, which is called flashing on the 60s. When did you first pick up a camera and start pointing it at folks?
When I was 10.
And what kind of a camera was it? You remember?
I think it was a Brownie. Little Brownie.
As were you at the time, probably, right?
And then in 1962, Frank Werber, who was the manager of the Kingston Trio, who I was working for, gave me a Nikon. No, a Leica.
A Leica?
A Leica. That was the best
There
one.
they are.
And there, you took a picture
yeah,
of those
there's the
guys.
Kingston Trio. So I said, well, I might as well shoot what's happening around me. And they were getting ready for an album cover here, and I shot that, and then...
Peter, Paul,
Paul and Mary concert, and this is Peter, Paul, and Mary. And I fell in love with him, and we eventually got married and had 4 beautiful children. And Pilar and
Bob Dylan.
Took a
Baba,
picture of Bob
Sunday,
Dylan.
and Jesse. And this is Bob Dylan. We had a castle back in the 60s, and he came and stayed there, along with Andy Warhol and the Velvet Underground. This was at the kitchen table.
And we have yet more pictures to see of yours. We'll go right back to those if we might. I think we have a picture of...
Oh, there's the castle.
there, yes.
Yeah, a lot of people came there.
Where was that?
That was in Los Angeles. And we went to see Otis Redding at the Whiskey A Go-Go at that time, and Timothy Leary. Here's Timothy Leary. That was at the Human Being in San Francisco, the first event that a lot of people came to celebrate the tribal feeling of the 60s. This was in the Haight-Ashbury.
Yeah, and he had been a professor at Harvard University and had all those impeccable academic credentials.
That's when he said, turn on, tune in, and drop out. And Ginsberg jumped up on the stage. He was doing some poetry readings there, and the Grateful Dead was playing, and he started dancing. This is the first time he ever jumped up and danced like that during an event. During that same year, there were anti-Vietnam War demonstrations, which we also went to. A lot of us were there. This is a very important part of the 60s, was the anti-Vietnam movement. From there, we went to Monterey Pop. This is our teepee. We set it up to take care of the people that were taking too many drugs. So they would come into that teepee and center themselves and then go back into the crowd. And I found out later that Jimi Hendrix was there and Dennis Hopper spent a lot of time in that teepee. This is one of the events that the Hog Farm put on this was in Los Alamos, where the bomb was made. We set up this teepee and dome, put on a light show, and it was fantastic, and all the scientists went. This picture was taken at the summer solstice celebration, where Yogi Bhajan was teaching the first group of hippies how to do Kundalini yoga.
Yes, you could get high without taking anything except the air.
At that point, we spent 2 years not smoking any marijuana.
And that's the event where you met
Getting
Stanley.
high on air.
That's the event where you met Stanley, right?
That's where Stanley was, right. This was at the El Rito Parade with the Road Hog and all the hog farmers. This is a wonderful event, 4th of July. And also here, this was the parade that came out. There's Pegasus. I made this outfit for Pegasus, a star-spangled cap and stripes, red and white stripes for a skirt. Pegasus ran for president.
Yes.
And finally, we see Wavy Gravy arriving for the big Woodstock Festival.
Yes, this was at the Kennedy Airport when we arrived. Wavy Gravy, they asked Wavy Gravy, you're in charge of security, aren't you? And he said, well, I guess so. Well, do you feel secure? And he says, the cameraman said yes, and he says, well, it must be working.
And they said, what are you going to use for security? And Wavy said, cream pies and seltzer bottles.
Right.
Yeah.
Crowd control, yeah.
You
That was the feeling that prevailed, was the Wavy Gravy feeling of not using force with the people. And that was the promoters used that too, that there was no force used, that nobody was supposed to be busted for marijuana or LSD or any drugs. And that's why it was such a peaceful event.
Wavy's basic philosophy of security is that if you deputize everybody, that nobody could get in any trouble. And he set up a password for access to backstage. The password was, I forgot.
You know, estimates are that there were perhaps 400,000 or more people at Woodstock, and yet it seems like just about everyone says they were at Woodstock.
That's right. Well, it's become sort of a badge of honor for a lot of people of a certain generation. And in fact, there was a cartoon I saw that I've always loved, in which there was a newscaster reading the results of a poll. He said, according to a recent survey, 97% of all Americans said they've been to Woodstock.
We'll take a quick break on that. We're going to continue our discussion here with our friends, and we'll take some questions from the audience as well as the Morning Exchange continues live from Edgewater Park as we look back 20 years to Woodstock. Wonderful stuff this morning. And Stanley, what are you doing these days? What's your life like?
After 10 years of leading a corporate existence, I've just recently gone back to putting together shows.
And where do you do them? Wherever?
Wherever someone is willing to pay me enough money to travel, I hope.
And Lisa, what is your interest? I know a lot of the video we saw this morning threading through this program was stuff that came out of your little Super 8 camera at Woodstock in 1969, and you're pulling that together for a video. Can you tell us an update on that?
I'm doing a video follow-up of my book, Flashing on the 60s, and my footage from what I shot at Woodstock is going to be part of it. But I went out and interviewed all the people in the book, like Wavy Gravy and Paul Krasner and Ginsberg and the Hog Farm and Michelle Phillips and Taj Mahal and Dennis Hopper. And so I'm putting into an hour and a half or 2-hour special that I'm going to produce before Christmas. I hope it's out on videotape before Christmas and on some channel. I hope some station picks it up.
Are you in the studio even as we speak?
Right now I'm editing. I'll go back today, and tomorrow I'll go back into the editing room, and I've been editing now for over 2 months, and I have 2 months to go.
And Joel, how about you? What are you working on next?
Right now I'm having a great time traveling around the country talking about Woodstock, but I'm based in Washington, D.C., and I'm working on other book projects, as usual.
So we'll see you in a couple of years then.
Maybe sooner.
Maybe sooner.
What are some final thoughts you might have, and just sort of summing things up in terms of, you've had a unique perspective on this?
Well, one of the questions I'm asked a lot is whether there will be another Woodstock or should be another Woodstock, and I think that there won't and there shouldn't, and I feel pretty strongly about that because it was a great moment in time. Woodstock was a great sort of the culmination of a lot of ideals and sensibilities about who we were in 1969 and what we were trying to believe in and be, and it sort of was the ultimate beach blanket bingo party where there were all these kids and no grown-ups and people could live life the way they wanted to for 3 days, and I think we should leave it at that. I think there will be another attempt at a Woodstock someday that's called Woodstock, but for my money it'll be the equivalent of having 4 guys get together with 3 guitars and a drum set and call themselves the Beatles.
I don't think it's ever going to happen again. It happened once.
Yes.
It can't happen again.
Rest in peace.
Stanley, what are your thoughts?
Well, if we do something again, we ought to do something that's in tune with the time in which we do it, that we shouldn't try to recreate 1969. 1969 was then, and now is different. We should do something for now and the sensibility that exists.
Well, I think Farm Aid and some of these worldwide Live Aid, some of these extraordinary
Cowboys for Indians.
extravaganzas.
Well, I think that those were natural outgrowths of the impulses that drove Woodstock to exist, and I'm glad if we broke the barriers that permit those things to happen and create the ability, then I'm delighted.
Well, Stanley,
what a wonderful legacy.
We're so happy that you guys held in there and put that thing together 20 years ago.
Well,
it was a wonderful event. Thank you very much, Stanley.
Our kids are carrying on the work, with Whole Earth festivals and going out and saving the environment. I think that's real
Absolutely. There are tons of
Yeah,
causes.
the kid. Yay for the kid.
I want to show you a couple of books here. First of all, take a look. This is Woodstock. This is Joel's book right here. Can we see that, please? Right there is Joel's book. And I want to show you Lisa's book. There it is, and be on the look for a fine video, almost 2 hours in length. Perhaps it will be 2 hours that will come out of these wonderful images that are on paper here. And this right here is the original publication that came out. This was the program for Woodstock, and we want to thank our guests for being here this morning. And we're going to take a bit of a break, and when we come back, we'll talk about Woodstock from the perspective of a psychologist who was youthful and interested in it at that time. And Alex Bevan is going to be with us as well, and the man who ran the free clinic here in Cleveland for such a long time will be with us as well. Right now, we're going to check in for one quick look at today's beautiful weather, and here's Tom. Thanks a lot, Tom, for gorgeous weather.
Well, you're welcome, Fred. It looks a little hazy out there.
I said she was formerly youthful. Hi for much water. Golly, a great, great band. You guys are just terrific over there. Oroboros. David, what do you think the... Thank you.
Oroboros, great, great band. And I think that we should tell you that they're going to be at the Euclid Tavern on Friday, just about every Friday. Great band. We want to thank all of these wonderful people who came to be with us this morning, and a special thanks to all of you who brought your bankies.
Thank you so much.
Tie-dyes, and came and joined us here on the lawn. Thanks to our fine crew who got up so early in the morning to put this all together, and to Bill DeMarn, who spent the weekend burning the midnight oil putting it all together. And we'll see you tomorrow.
Have a good day.